So welcome to today's lecture, which is all about cardiovascular training, or otherwise known as cardio training. Now this is again something which is very important not just for athletes but even general population, because any activity which requires movement or which requires you to do something for a certain duration of time will put some sort of stress on your cardiovascular system, and thereby training it in the right way can make sure that you are more efficient and you're able to also perform at a higher level. So let's get to it. So in today's lecture, we're going to be looking at the heart and body connection, the types of cardio activities other than just running, heart rate and training zones, cardio for different life stages, and an important topic which is about the role of cardiovascular training when it comes to mental health. So first up we have the heart and body connection. Now the heart and body, naturally because your heart is part of the body, they work together. The heart works as a pump to pump blood throughout the body. Now we are not really going to get too much into the anatomy and the physiology of it, because that is information which is very widely available outside, and like I said, for us the whole purpose of this lecture and all other lectures is to teach you the practical aspects of how exactly you can become a better strength and conditioning coach, or if you are interested in getting into the field, what are the things to keep in mind. So like I said, the heart pumps blood throughout the body, and your lungs is responsible for removing the waste gases from it, and also for pumping oxygen back into the blood so that it can continue to go throughout the body and deliver this oxygen as well as other nutrients to various parts of the body. Now certain everyday habits that are good and bad could be all about doing the little things correctly. Now a good activity for your cardiovascular system would naturally be getting into some sort of physical activity. Physical activity could be in the form of something that is more structured, like a strength and conditioning program. Sometimes it could be involved in maybe let's say playing a sport. For children it could be in free play, which means them just going out and running around, throwing things, jumping, catching, playing with their friends, anything. All of these are actually good for the body. Now when you talk about the negative side of it, it means leading a very sedentary lifestyle, and I am sure that there is a large part of our population today who actually has a sedentary lifestyle where they are just sitting in office all day from morning to night, not really moving, not really doing any physical activity, and naturally their cardiovascular system, because it is not being used as much, is not going to be as fit as it should be. In addition to this, of course, there are a number of other factors which can affect your cardiovascular health, like your nutrition, your stress levels, your sleep. All of these are actually very important to take care of when it comes to your general cardiovascular health. Sometimes I see a lot of people who only exercise and then they don't eat well, they don't sleep properly, they don't take care of their stress, and they're surprised when they suddenly end up with some sort of heart related issue at the age of maybe 35 or 40. Well, remember, your body is not just about exercise. There are a number of other factors that also have to be done correctly for you to be functioning at the optimal level. Now let's talk a little bit about the aerobic and anaerobic system. In a very base form, aerobic system or any sort of aerobic activity is one where the body is able to get sufficient access to oxygen in order to continue doing that activity. Whereas anaerobic system or the anaerobic activity is something where the body has to perform with insufficient amount of oxygen. This is the very simple differentiation between both of these systems. Like I said, at a physiological level it goes far more deeper, which is beyond the scope of today's lecture, but it is just important to understand this main difference, which is one has sufficient supply of oxygen whereas the other does not. So what are the types of cardio activities? Most of the time when we talk about doing cardio, the first thing that comes to mind is either a person running in a garden or in a park or down the road, or nowadays because gyms are so common, we think about a person just running on a treadmill. They might run endlessly for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, whatever it is, depending on their fitness levels. Well, it's important to understand that cardio is far more than just running alone. What are some ways to engage in cardiovascular activity? Well, if you're in a gym, you can get off the treadmill, maybe try looking at the other machines around, get onto an elliptical, get onto a cycling machine. All of these are different forms of cardiovascular training, which allows you to sometimes even train at different intensities and also can train other muscles around. For example, if you have some sort of a issue with maybe let's say your ankle or your knee, any sort of an impact based training like running or jumping can actually put more load on those joints and can sometimes prevent you from doing cardio. In such cases, a very good alternative would be a cycle, because cycling, even though it involves your ankle and knee, it is a non impact activity, which means you're not repeatedly contacting some surface or putting load on it in that manner. Another great cardio activity is swimming. All of these are also considered cardio because it does get your heart rate up, it does train your cardiovascular system, it does force your heart to pump blood more efficiently throughout the body to meet the needs of the activity that you're doing. Now, some of the benefits of having variety, first and foremost, on a very base level for majority of the population out there, is that you don't get bored. Even when you're working with your athletes, as much as it is a performance oriented field, they also would enjoy it if you have some variation once in a while. It's not that every single cardio session has to be a new activity, but once in a while maybe get them off the treadmill, put them onto a cycle, get them off the cycle, put them onto an elliptical. It will be a new activity, and the muscles involved also will be slightly different because the biomechanical pattern of when you're running versus when you're cycling versus when you're doing an elliptical versus when you're swimming are all different. And so these differences will ensure that the muscles that are working are also being trained in a different manner. Sometimes this could also even be beneficial to the kind of activity that you want to do. So remember to consider these differences and to make sure that they are being exposed to different types of activities, not too frequently, but at the right time. Now, when you talk about the practical tips for integrating cardio into daily life, this is going to be more towards the general population. For them, cardio could be something as simple as just going out for a walk in the evening. You don't like to go alone, go out with your friends or family or your neighbors. The whole idea is to integrate it into your life in a way where you also enjoy it and at the same time it is sustainable. It's not that we're looking at doing this activity only for the next 1 week or the next 1 month or the next 1 year. Ideally, we want exercise to be a part of life, and so finding something that you enjoy that gives you physical benefits but at the same time which is sustainable is going to be key. You can go for a walk, like I said, you can engage in swimming, you can take the flight of stairs instead of taking the lift every day at work, you can maybe walk anything that is within 1 kilometers around you instead of taking your car. Sometimes these little changes that you make can often have a compounding effect over a large span of time. So remember to make these small changes and you will definitely see the benefits from it. Now let's talk about the heart rate and training zones. So first and foremost, what is heart rate? Well, it's nothing more than the number of beats per minute. So that's why we say that even a lot of these smartwatches and things you might see as for example on an Apple Watch or any sort of a smartwatch, you might see that it might say 100 BPM. So BPM stands for beats per minute. So this is important because it is showing how how hard your heart is working to pump blood throughout the system. The lower the beats per minute, naturally the less work that your heart is having to do. The higher the beats per minute, the more work that your heart is having to do. Now this is important for us as strength and conditioning coaches because it also allows us to understand at what intensity an athlete should be training at based on the requirements of their sport. So now let's talk about using heart rate zones and how exactly can we create an effective workout. Now when it comes to classifying heart rate zones, there are some differences by different governing bodies, but on average I would say there are probably about 5 heart rate zones. Zone 1 would be 50 to 60%, 60 to 70% would be zone 2, 70 to 80 would be zone 3, 80 to 90 would be 4 and 90 to 100 would be zone 5. Now when I talk about these percentages, 50%, 55%, 80%, 90%, what does it mean? What is a percentage of? Well, it's the percentage of what your maximal heart rate is. So that's very important to understand. A lot of times I've seen even whether it's athletes or coaches, they talk about intensities in terms of percentages, but they don't know what that percentage stands for or what is it a percentage of. Is it a percentage of your resting heart rate? Is it a percentage of your maximum heart rate? Is it a percentage of the duration of the exercise? It's very important to understand what exactly it is. So in this case, when we talk about heart rate zone, we're talking about the percentage of your maximum heart rate. So that takes us to the next part, which is how do we measure this? How do we measure a person's maximum heart rate? Well, a very simple way, probably not the most accurate, but still fairly decent when we are working in most settings, is a very simple formula, which is 220 minus the person's age. That is going to give you their maximum heart rate. Now, let's take an example. Let's say there is a 30-year-old who comes to you and you want to make them exercise at a particular heart rate zone. So if you want to take the percentage, you need to know what is their maximum heart rate, right? So you're going to take 220 minus 30. So that becomes 190, right? So 190 is their maximum heart rate. Now from that, depending on the training zone, you can take the appropriate percentage that you require, right? So this is a simple formula, maybe not always the most accurate, and we will see why, because we have a second formula known as the Carbonin method. Now another formula which we have is the Carbonin formula. Now the Carbonin formula is different from the previous one because it takes your heart rate or your resting heart rate into consideration. Why is this important? Well, in the first example, like you saw, all we are doing is taking one number which is a standardized constant called 220, and you are subtracting a person's age. So yes, that does make sense to a certain extent, because the greater the age, the lesser is the maximum heart rate that they can go to when they do any sort of training, and that is a logical thing. Maybe a 70-year-old cannot train at the same intensity that maybe a 20-year-old can train at. But remember, a person's resting heart rate is a determining factor to a large extent of their overall cardiovascular health. So the lower a resting heart rate for a particular athlete or a person, generally their cardiovascular health is higher in terms of their fitness, whereas the higher the resting heart rate, lower can be their fitness. So when we talk about the Carbonin formula, what it does is it takes your resting heart rate into consideration. Now I would urge you to go and do a simple Google search to get the formula exactly, because it is slightly more complex and I would not want to confuse that formula with the one that we previously discussed. But remember that it is important to understand what each variable in that equation stands for and how it actually helps us as a strength and conditioning coach. So Carbonin formula is slightly more accurate, but it does require a little bit more calculation. But if you want to just do a simple quick calculation, you can go to the first formula that we spoke about, which is 220 minus age. So since we have explored both of these, let's now look at some very I would say understandable ways of gauging training intensity, which can be easily explained to the athlete or the client that you are working with. Because for a client, you don't want to just tell them, okay, this is your formula, this is your maximum heart rate, this is your resting heart rate. It can often be very confusing, overwhelming, and also that's not information which they need to know. At the end of the day, you're a strength and conditioning coach, you do all the calculations and you only give the information that is relevant to them. So a simple way is something called as the talk test. If you want to work at a low to moderate intensity, when they're on a treadmill or something, just see if they're able to hold a conversation. If they're not able to hold a conversation and if they're a beginner, that means maybe you need to bring down the intensity. On the other hand, we also have something called a perceived effort or a rate of perceived exertion, what we say. Here, all we're asking is, on a particular scale, how difficult is the current activity that you're doing, or how difficult was the activity that you just finished. You can rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 10. Some people do it 1 to 20, up to you. I would say keep it simple. 1 to 10 is effective. That gives enough numbers in between for them to get a slightly accurate sort of a reading, but at the same time it's not too broad of a spectrum like 1 to 20. So these are some simple ways, but remember, this is also something which is at times subjective. So if there is one particular person who is giving a 7 out of 10 in terms of difficulty, it's not necessary that that same intensity would correspond to another person who is also saying 7. Their own understanding of what a 7 on 10 means could vary from person to person, so do keep that in mind. Another key role where cardio can come into play is in terms of recovery, primarily active recovery. So let's say that an athlete has had a very heavy session, and in the evening, rather than just simply sitting still and lying down all day, you can actually have them do maybe a simple 10 to 15 minute slow jog. It can be just a very slow activity, and what this does is it promotes circulation in the body. As the blood is pumping throughout the body, it will pick up the waste products from different muscles and different organs and will make sure that it is efficiently being removed from the body. So this is actually a very good way to help them recover better than simply resting. So keep it in mind, sometimes a little bit of activity is better than no activity at all when it comes to recovery, unless the athlete is too tired where they just can't do anything at all. Now, cardio for different life stages. So it is important to consider that for different stages of life, different needs are there in terms of the cardio activities they do. There is also different limitations in terms of that. Like I said, for a senior citizen, maybe just going on a walk or doing some simple activity on a cycle for 10 minutes could be all the cardio that they need. Maybe for an athlete, that would definitely be not enough. You would have to push them, they will have to do more intense exercises for longer durations. They might have to do high intensity interval training. They might have to do cardio of different forms, like I said, maybe on the treadmill, on the cycle, swimming, elliptical, Whereas let's consider maybe a child in this case. Maybe you have a child who's not an athlete, you just want them to generally get fit. Send them out to play, take them to a park, maybe take them for some sports classes. If possible, take them to multiple sports classes where they can play different activities. So they're getting exposed to different movement patterns, playing at different intensities. They're also getting used to understanding what exactly it takes to actually play a different sport. So all of these are important. But like I said, understand what is the age, which stage they are in life, and then choose the right kind of cardio activity for them. Don't go by the premise that, okay, this is the cardio activity that I believe in, so all my clients, irrespective of their age, their gender, their training status, they have to do the same. No, it's not only about varying just the intensity alone, it's also what that activity entails and the risk associated with it. For example, for a senior citizen, you would not unnecessarily put them onto maybe some sort of a uphill running activity, right? What are you trying to gain from that? You're just going to put unnecessarily load on their joints, their knees, their ankles, and also the risk of falling. Similarly, even for a child who's very, very young, you're not going to put them onto heavy resistance cycling, right? Because you're just unnecessarily putting a lot of load on the joints. So understand what is required at what time and then do the right thing. Now the last one is cardio's role when it comes to mental health. This is often a topic which is not addressed very much, but cardiovascular activity can actually help you improve your mental health, even your energy levels. The reason for this is when you do any sort of cardiovascular activity, it releases a lot of feel-good hormones in the body, such as serotonin and certain other endorphins, right? So what this does is, for a short period of time or sometimes even extended periods, if you have been doing it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, can keep you at an elevated mood level. This is also sometimes what we call as a runner's high, which means it's almost a feeling of euphoria when you have actually done some sort of cardiovascular activity. And if you're able to repeatedly do this on a regular basis, like let's say, every day or every other day for a couple of weeks, months or years, these can also have lasting effects. That means it's not that you just do a cardio activity and you feel better for a few hours and then you feel low again. No, the benefits can actually last for a longer period of time. So these mood boosting effects of regular cardio is often underappreciated and also often not understood clearly by the professionals who are working with athletes or even regular clients. Now these can sometimes be leveraged when you're working with maybe, like, let's say, a mental health professional or a health professional or a medical doctor in helping students deal with their anxiety or any sort of mental health challenges. For example, if there is a player who's very, very anxious, sometimes getting them to do any sort of a cardio activity at a slightly higher intensity can actually help calm them down. This is actually might be a little counterintuitive, but it does help because it helps expend some of that extra energy or that nervousness that is there. Sometimes when they're just able to freely express themselves through their body, it can help calm down the system. Similarly, you can do certain other activities provided you're able to understand what you're doing, what is the intention, and you're not putting the client at risk. That is never the case. It cannot be that just because an athlete, that they're going to feel better by doing some sort of physical activity, and if they have an ankle sprain, you cannot make them do cardio, you cannot make them run and say that I did this because you'll feel better, but on the other hand you've broken their ankle even more. So that's not the purpose. Remember, look at the entire picture, look at the individual pieces of the puzzle, but don't lose sight of the whole picture. So that's very, very important when it comes to understanding what are the benefits of cardiovascular health, not just from a physical perspective, but even from a mental one. So sort of to just summarize, cardiovascular training definitely does form the base for a lot of other training that you'll do, because if their cardiovascular fitness is not good, they cannot do certain activities for a extended period of time like how you would want them to do. It could be in the gym, or it could be in the sport, or even in their day-to-day lives. In addition to this, we also looked at the different types of cardio. Like I said, running is not the only form of cardio, even though it might be the most common one. There are other ones as well. Then we looked at what it means to do, what it means when we say heart rate, how do you calculate maximum heart rate, as well as the different training zones. Then we looked at cardio for different life stages, starting from maybe a child going up to a senior citizen. And last but not the least, we also looked at the close connection between cardio and mental health and how it can benefit the body overall, not just from a physical perspective, but from a mental one too. So I hope this lecture has been interesting for you, and I'll see you in the next one.